Good evening, my fellow whisperers, and welcome back to Whispers in the Dark. That's how I always imagined it would sound, my voice, low and careful, like someone moving through a house where they're not sure they're alone. If I ever told this story out loud, I'd start it like that. I'd let the silence settle between words. I'd let you lean closer, the way people do when they know they shouldn't. Because there are some places you aren't meant to picture too vividly. And a morgue is one of them. But it was my job to picture it vividly. To know every detail, every cabinet latch, every drain in the floor, every knot in the fluorescent hum overhead, the way it vibrated behind your eyes after enough hours beneath it. I had to know that place the way sailors know the sea, by touch, by sound, by scent, by the sudden shifts that mean danger is coming. I'm telling you now, danger came. Not all at once. Not with a scream. Not with a jump out of the dark. It came the way cold does, seeping in slowly, until you realize you've been shivering for a long time. I worked nights at the county morgue because the pay was better, and the fewer people there were, the easier it was to breathe. I didn't love death. I didn't romanticize it. I wasn't one of those people who wore black eyeliner like a uniform and talked about the beauty of endings. It wasn't like that. It was practical. Dead bodies don't talk. Dead bodies don't demand you smile. Dead bodies don't lean too close and ask why you look tired. They don't call you sweetheart. They don't ask you out. They don't touch you by accident that somehow happens every time they pass. The dead were simple. The living were complicated. And I thought I understood the dead. Our morgue wasn't glamorous, nothing like what you see in crime shows. It was a squat building behind the hospital, separate for a reason. The air between them always felt different, like you crossed an invisible line, and the world got a little quieter. The walkway was lit by harsh security lamps that made everything look drained of color. Even on clear nights, the light seemed dusty, as if it had to fight its way through a film. Inside, the air was colder. Not just refrigerated cold, sterile cold. The kind that dries out your nostrils and turns every breath into a small, controlled effort. The kind that makes your skin tighten on your hands. You learned to keep lotion in your locker because if you didn't, your knuckles would split from constant washing and disinfectant. Everything smelled like antiseptic, latex, and something faintly metallic that never really went away. You could scrub the floors until your arms burned, and that underlying scent would linger, like the building itself had absorbed it. Maybe it had. The nights were usually steady. Intake, paperwork, tagging, storage, occasional assistance, with an autopsy when the pathologist wanted a second pair of hands, and the day staff had already gone. The work had a rhythm. I liked rhythm. Rhythm meant control. On the night it happened, the rhythm broke. It was January, and the cold outside had sharpened into something mean. The wind made small, thin noises against the building, like fingernails dragging a long brick. I remember that because I paused at the employee entrance and listened before I went in, half a joke with myself, half a habit. When you work around the dead long enough, you develop little rituals, little ways to remind yourself you're still alive. I swiped my badge. The lock clicked open. Behind the glass, the hallway stretched under fluorescent lights, pale and empty. "Okay," I murmured, as if speaking to the building. "Play nice tonight." The security camera in the corner watched me come in. We had cameras everywhere, mostly for chain of custody reasons, who accessed which body and when. Also, because sometimes families got desperate. Sometimes people tried to sneak in. Sometimes people did worse. I checked the log at the front desk. There were 2 bodies already in cold storage from earlier, and one expected later, Jane Doe, found near the riverbank, suspected exposure. No autopsy yet, just intake and hold until morning. I poured myself coffee from the burnt little pot in the break area, regretted it immediately, and went to the intake bay to prep. It was quiet enough that every sound became loud. The squeak of my shoes, the soft slap of latex gloves when I snapped them on, the metallic sigh of a cabinet door opening. The intake bay was the warmest part of the morgue, still cold compared to normal rooms, but not refrigerated like storage. There was a stainless steel gurney, a scale, shelves of body bags, tags, clean linens, evidence containers. Everything was made of surfaces that didn't absorb. Nothing in there was meant to feel human. The clock above the door ticked louder than it should have, or maybe my brain just noticed it more because I was alone. Midnight passed. 1 in the morning. The wind scratched at the building. The fluorescent lights hummed. At 1:47 a.m., the call came from hospital security. "Transfer inbound," the voice said over the intercom. "County pickup. 1 female found in the north lot. EMS declared. Coming to you." I frowned. That wasn't the Jane Doe from the river. That was new. Cause: unknown. Security found her. No ID, no obvious trauma. A dead body without obvious trauma meant questions. Questions meant paperwork. Paperwork meant time. I sighed, adjusted my ponytail tighter, and went to meet the transport. The service doors opened with a gust of outside air, sharp and biting. 2 orderlies rolled in the gurney under fluorescent glare. The body bag was black and wet with melted frost. There was a tag tied to the zipper with a thin plastic loop. Female approx, mid-30s. Time of death: 1:12 a.m. found. Hospital North parking lot. I watched their faces as they signed the handoff. The orderlies looked relieved to leave. People always looked relieved to leave a body behind, like it might follow them. "Anything weird?" I asked, keeping my voice light. One of them hesitated. He was young, with a red mark across his nose from his mask. "She was cold," he said, as if that wasn't obvious. "They're all cold." He swallowed. Colder than she should have been, like she'd been out for hours. but security says they found her 20 minutes before EMS called it. I looked at the bag again. Frost crystals clung to the seams, glittering under the lights. "All right," I said, "thanks." They left quickly. The doors shut. The latch clicked like a final word. I rolled the gurney into intake. The wheels squeaked. The sound echoed. As I positioned her on the scale, the overhead lights flickered once, fast and subtle. I froze, eyes snapping up. It happened sometimes. The building was old. The electricity hiccuped. But my skin prickled anyway. I forced myself to keep moving. I documented. I photographed. I checked the tag. Then I unzipped the body bag. You get used to the first moment, the reveal. Not because it stops being strange, but because you learn how to box your reactions. You learn how to look at a human body and think in categories, identifying marks, condition, clothing, injuries, evidence. She wasn't clothed. That was unusual. Not impossible. Hypothermia cases sometimes involved paradoxical undressing. But she had no hospital gown, no sheet, nothing. Her skin was pale in a way that looked almost bluish under the lights. Her hair was dark, damp, spread around her head like seaweed. Her lips were slightly parted, and her eyes were open. That made me pause. Not fear, just that small internal jolt. Most bodies came with eyes closed, either naturally or because someone had shut them. Open eyes were unsettling, the way mannequins are unsettling. Like you're being witnessed by something that shouldn't be witnessing. I leaned closer, gloved fingers lifting her eyelid gently to check pupils. Fixed, dilated, cold to the touch. Dead. Still, something about her face felt wrong, not her expression, not her features. She was pretty in a tired way, like someone who'd been through too much and stopped fighting it. But the wrongness was deeper. Her skin didn't have the mottled, waxy look I associated with time. There was no lividity pooling where gravity had pulled blood downward. It was too even. As I examined her neck, I noticed faint marks around her throat. Not bruises, more like pressure lines. A ring of shallow indentations, as if something had pressed there and then released. A collar, a rope, fingers. I took photographs and made notes. I checked her hands for defensive wounds. Nothing. I checked under her nails. Clean, too clean. The silence in the intake bay was heavy enough that I heard the refrigeration units in the walls breathing. When I went to close her eyes, my fingers hovered. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because she looked like she was staring at something beyond me. Maybe because leaving them open felt like an invitation. I pressed gently against her lids. They didn't close. I applied a bit more pressure. Her eyelashes trembled against my glove. Her lids slid down, then slowly, as soon as I released, they lifted again. My stomach tightened. Muscle tension after death could cause odd things. But eyelids, usually they stayed shut if you shut them. I tried again, slower. Same result, shut then open like a slow blink. A laugh almost escaped me. Not because it was funny, but because it was the only way my brain knew how to respond to discomfort. I swallowed it down. Okay, I said aloud, because talking to the dead sometimes made the air feel less thick. You can keep them open then. Her eyes stared at the ceiling. I zipped the bag back up, tighter than I needed to, and rolled her toward cold storage. Cold storage was the heart of the morgue rows of stainless steel doors in a refrigerated room, each one a drawer that slid out with a heavy, reluctant sound. The floor was textured rubber to prevent slipping. The cold hit you immediately, clawing through your scrubs. Even with a jacket, you felt it in your bones after a few minutes. I chose an empty drawer near the middle. Not too high, not too low. The drawers at the bottom always seemed darker, like the light didn't want to touch them. I slid her in. The metal rails hissed. The bag caught slightly on the edge, and I tugged it to straighten it. For a second, my gloved hand pressed against the body through the bag. It felt soft, not rigid, not beginning rigor. That made no sense, but I told myself she could have been newly deceased. Rigor didn't set in immediately. People on TV thought death was instant stiffness. Real life was messier. Still, I pulled my hand away quickly. I shut the drawer. The latch clicked. The number plate stared back at me like an eye. When I turned, I saw my reflection in the shiny cabinet surfaces, stretched and distorted. A woman in scrubs, hair pulled back, face slightly sallow under fluorescent light. For the first time that night, I felt the urge to leave. To go back to the front desk, sip bad coffee, watch the monitors, and let the hours pass until morning staff arrived. So that's what I did. I sat at the desk with the security monitor array in front of me. 14 feeds, hallway cameras, intake bay, cold storage, external doors, the autopsy suite, the loading bay. The screen light tinted my face pale. My coffee steamed. My paperwork sat in neat stacks. At 2:26 a.m., I saw movement on the cold storage feed. I leaned forward. The cold storage room was empty, at least. It should have been. The camera's angle showed most of the drawers and the main aisle. The room looked like a long steel throat, and something moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the camera, static compression artifact, the way low light made things shimmer. But then it happened again. A slow shift near the drawer where I had placed her. The latch didn't move. The drawer didn't open. But the shadow beneath it deepened and then lightened, as if something had passed in front of the camera. My mouth went dry. I grabbed the radio. Security, this is Morgue. Can you confirm if anyone's in cold storage? A crackle. Negative, Morgue, no one authorized. Why? I'm seeing movement on the feed, I said. Could be camera glitch. It's not a glitch, I said, surprised by how sharp my voice sounded. Do you want us to send someone? I looked at the monitor again. The room was still. No, I said, because pride is a stupid thing. I'll check. I put on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and walked down the corridor toward the cold storage door. The hallway seemed longer than usual. The fluorescent lights made my shadow look thin and jittery. I told myself, you are a professional. You handle bodies. You handle death. This is a building. This is metal and electricity and cold air. My hand on the cold storage door handle was steady. When I opened it, the cold hit me like a slap. The room was exactly as it had been. Empty. Drawers closed. No footprints in the faint frost that sometimes gathered near the vents. I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. The sound of it closing was final, thick. My flashlight beam cut across the steel. Everything gleamed with dull, sterile shine. I walked to the drawer. The latch was shut. I pressed my gloved hand against the metal. It was so cold it almost burned. Okay, I murmured. Nothing. I turned to leave. And then I heard it. Not a voice, not a breath. A sound like fabric shifting, like plastic rubbing. Very faint. Behind me. I froze so hard my shoulders ached. The flashlight beam trembled slightly as I turned it back toward the drawers. Nothing moved. I waited. My breath fogged in front of me. The fog drifted, slow and delicate, like something alive. Then from somewhere close, too close, I heard a tiny, wet click, like teeth touching. I swallowed. My throat made a loud, pathetic sound. Is someone in here? I called stupidly, like someone would answer. Like there was a living person hiding among the dead. Silence. I forced myself to step forward. One step, then another. The flashlight washed across each drawer face. Numbers, latches, cold, unfeeling metal. I reached the drawer again, the one with her inside. For a moment, I just stared at it. A crazy thought fluttered through my mind. What if she isn't dead? But she was. I'd checked. I'd documented. I'd felt that chill. Still, my hand hovered over the latch. I don't know why I didn't just leave. Maybe because fear and curiosity are twins. Maybe because some part of me wanted to prove the monitor had been wrong. Maybe because I couldn't stand not knowing. I flipped the latch. The sound was loud, sharp. I pulled the handle and slid the drawer open. The bag lay there undisturbed, zipper still shut. Frost clung to it. I exhaled shaky. See, nothing. But my relief didn't last, because as I stared, I realized something small and impossible. The tag I had tied to the zipper loop, was gone. I leaned closer. My flashlight beam trembled over the seam. The plastic loop was still there, but the tag wasn't attached. My brain tried to reorder reality in a way that made sense. Maybe I hadn't tied it properly. Maybe it had slipped. Maybe it had fallen into the drawer. I searched the drawer edges. Nothing. I checked the floor. Nothing. That cold prickle returned, crawling up my spine. I backed away from the drawer and scanned the room. That's when I saw it. A tag lying near the far corner, close to the drain. White rectangle, plastic sheen. My tag. I walked toward it slowly, as if sudden movement might startle something. The tag lay face down. The plastic loop was still attached, torn, not slipped, torn. I crouched and picked it up. The paper was damp, the ink smudged, and something like a fingerprint was visible on the wet surface. A dark smear, elongated, too narrow to be human. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. I stood, heart banging against my ribs. The flashlight beam swung wildly as I turned back to the drawers. The drawer was still open. The bag was still there, but the bag looked wrong. The zipper line bulged slightly, as if something inside had shifted. I stared for a long second. Then the zipper moved. Just a millimeter, then another. A slow, deliberate crawl, like a mouth learning how to open. My body locked up. I couldn't even scream. My lungs refused. The zipper slid another inch. The bag's black plastic creased and stretched. And then soft, wet, unmistakable, something inside scraped against the inner surface, like fingernails dragging. A shape pressed outward. A hand, not gloved, not pale, not stiff. A hand pushing. My brain finally snapped into motion. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The flashlight dropped and clattered on the rubber floor, beam spinning in frantic circles. In the strobing light, I saw the bag swell, the zipper pull twitch. I turned and ran. The cold storage door felt miles away. My shoes slipped slightly on the rubber. My fingers fumbled for the handle. Behind me, something made a sound like plastic ripping. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it behind me hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood there, panting, back pressed against the door. The cold seeped through it into my spine. My heart was so loud, I could barely hear anything else. I waited for a sound from the other side, pounding, scratching, anything. Nothing. For several seconds, there was only the hum of the hallway lights and my own ragged breath. Then, very softly, from inside the cold storage room, a dragging sound, like something heavy sliding across rubber. I jerked away from the door, as if it had burned me. "No," I whispered. I backed down the hallway, eyes locked on the door. The dragging continued, slow, steady, not frantic, not someone trapped, something moving with purpose. I reached the desk area and nearly tripped over the chair. My hands shook so violently I could barely grab the radio. "Security," I gasped. "Send someone now. Cold storage something." Static, then morgue, repeat. "What's happening?" "There's someone in cold storage," I said, voice cracking. "The body, it's moving." It opened the bag. A beat of silence that felt like judgment. Then, "We're sending Officer Patel and Officer Green. Stay where you are." I didn't want to stay where I was. I wanted to run out into the night, into the wind, into anything that wasn't steel and cold and fluorescent light. but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I sat down hard in the chair, staring at the monitor array. My fingers hovered over the keyboard that controlled camera angles. The cold storage feed still showed the room. Empty aisle, closed drawers. My drawer was open. The bag inside was partially unzipped. From this distance, through grainy black and white, it looked like a dark mouth. I stared so hard my eyes burned. Then a shape rose from the drawer. At first it looked like smoke, then like a shadow. But it had edges. It had limbs. A head lifted into view, hair hanging in damp strands. A shoulder followed, an arm. She climbed out of the drawer like someone emerging from water. The camera angle showed her pulling herself down, bare feet touching the rubber floor. She stood, even through the monitor. I could see she was trembling, not like someone cold, but like someone fighting their own body. She swayed in the aisle, head tilted, hair obscuring her face. Then slowly, she turned toward the camera. Her face came into view. Her eyes were open, and they were staring directly into the lens, directly at me. I couldn't breathe. On the screen, her mouth opened. It didn't look like a gasp. It didn't look like someone taking a first breath. It looked like a smile, remembering how to form. Her lips stretched too far, corners pulling upward in a way that made her cheeks crease strangely. Then she stepped forward. One step, then another. Bare feet silent. Her body moved with a stiffness that wasn't rigor, it was imitation. Like she'd watched humans walk and was trying to replicate it. She came closer to the camera. The feed glitched slightly, static crawling. Her face filled more of the frame. And then she lifted her hand and pressed it against the camera housing. The screen jolted. The image warped. For a second, all I saw was blurred skin, dark hair, and something like frost crystals on her fingers. She held it there. Then her fingers curled around the edge, and the camera feed went dead. The screen turned black. I stared at it, unable to process what I'd just seen. My mind tried to insist it was a nightmare, a stress hallucination, a prank, anything except real. But the air felt real. The chair under me felt real. My pulse felt violently real. The other feeds showed the hallway outside cold storage, the autopsy suite, the loading bay. No movement, but I knew she wasn't contained anymore. A sound came from down the hallway, metal creaking, a drawer opening. No, the sound was closer. It came from somewhere else, somewhere not on camera. The autopsy suite, maybe. The intake bay. I looked at the monitors, scanning, and there, on the intake bay feed, something moved. The intake bay was empty, except for the gurney and shelves. The camera was positioned high, showing the stainless table and the doorway. A shadow passed across the frame, not from lighting, something moving between the camera and the room. Then slowly, a figure stepped into view. Her. She stood in the intake bay doorway, head tilted, hair damp, body bare, and pale against the stainless background. She looked like a negative image of a human. She took a step into the room. Her feet left faint wet marks on the floor. She turned her head slightly, as if listening. Then she moved toward the shelves where the body bags were stored. I watched, frozen, as she reached out and brushed her fingers across the stacked black bags. It was gentle, curious, like someone petting an animal. Then she grabbed one and yanked. The bag tumbled down. She crouched and brought it to her face, pressing her nose against it. My stomach clenched. I knew that motion, the motion of someone inhaling a smell they crave. She held the bag for a long moment. Then her head snapped up fast. She turned toward the camera, toward me again. Her mouth opened, and though I couldn't hear it, I could see her lips forming something. A shape, a word. It looked like she said my name. How would she know my name? I hadn't said it. No one had. But she mouthed it anyway, as if tasting it. Then she began walking down the hall, out of camera view, toward the desk where I sat. My hands finally moved. I slammed the lock button for the main door controls, internal lockdown. The morgue had heavy doors with electronic locks you could trigger in an emergency. Usually, it was for intruders. I triggered them all. The system beeped confirmation. Red indicators lit. Locked, locked, locked. Only one door remained unlocked. The small interior door leading from the desk area into the hallway network. The one I was closest to. My mind raced. If she was coming, I needed distance. I needed a barrier. I leapt from the chair and ran to that door, yanking it shut and flipping the manual bolt. The metal bar slid into place with a satisfying clunk. I backed away, chest heaving, eyes darting. The desk area was a small space. Monitors, paperwork, cabinets, a sink, a locker room doorway, and behind me, the main exit doors that led outside. Those doors were locked from the inside unless you used a badge or emergency override. My badge was in my pocket. My hand clenched around it like a lifeline. I looked at the hallway camera feed that covered the corridor outside the door I'd just bolted. For several seconds, nothing. Then slowly, she entered the frame. She moved down the hallway with that same imitation gait. Head slightly tilted. Arms hanging too loose. Her hair clung to her shoulders like wet weeds. She stopped in front of the door I'd bolted. She stood still for an unnerving amount of time. No fidgeting, no impatient shifting, just stillness. Then she lifted her hand and placed it on the door. Her fingers splayed, as if feeling the temperature, as if reading the metal. I held my breath, eyes wide, unable to look away. She leaned closer, pressing her forehead against the door. Her hair slid forward, obscuring her face. Her shoulders rose and fell once, slow. Then she whispered something. I couldn't hear it through the camera, but I could see the movement of her jaw. I could see the way her throat moved, and around her throat under the harsh light. The pressure marks I'd noticed earlier looked darker now, like bruising blooming. Something about that made cold dread spread through my stomach. The radio crackled on the desk. I flinched so hard my shoulders jerked. Morgue, Officer Patel. We're at the exterior door. It won't open, lockdown engaged. Can you? I grabbed the radio, pressing it to my mouth, voice shaking. Don't come in. Don't, she's inside. She's not. Ma'am, calm down, Patel said. Open the door. We're coming in. No, I hissed. Listen to me. She's in the hallway. She's right outside. A sharp sound interrupted me. Not from the radio. From the door. A soft knock. Once, then again. Very gentle. My eyes flicked to the actual door in front of me, as if she could knock through steel, and I'd hear it. But it wasn't the hallway door she was at. The knock came from behind me, from the main exit doors, the doors that led outside. I turned slowly, heart hammering. The main exit doors were thick, with a narrow window strip. The night beyond was dark, lit by security lamps, and there, framed in the window, was a face. Her face. She was outside. She stared in, eyes wide, expression oddly calm. Her hair was plastered to the glass by moisture. Her lips were parted. She raised her hand and tapped the glass again. Gently. Knock, knock. My brain couldn't reconcile it. I'd seen her on the hallway camera. I'd seen her at the bolted door. She couldn't be outside. Unless that wasn't the only one. Unless whatever had walked out of the drawer wasn't a single body moving, but something that could move through spaces differently. Something that could split or appear where it was watched. I looked back to the monitor. The hallway feed still showed her at the bolted door, forehead pressed against metal. And yet she was also outside, staring at me through the glass. My throat made a small, strangled sound. The one outside smiled slowly, as if pleased. She opened her mouth and exhaled against the glass. Fog bloomed, white and thick. Then, with her fingertip, she drew a shape in the condensation. A circle around the spot where her throat marks were, like she was reminding me, like she was saying, look, this is where it starts. Behind me, the hallway camera showed the other her lifting her head. Her hair slid aside, revealing her face. She smiled too. They moved in sync, like reflections. And then both opened their mouths wide. So wide that for a second, I thought their jaws had unhinged. The corners stretched past what skin should allow. Their teeth were visible, too many, too small, too sharp. They didn't scream. They breathed, a long, slow exhale that made the lights in the desk area flicker. The monitor screens shuddered. The fluorescent hum deepened, like the building itself had swallowed something cold. The air temperature dropped suddenly. My breath became visible. The skin on my arms prickled. The one outside pressed her palm flat against the glass. The one in the hallway pressed her palm flat against the door. both leaned in, and then I heard it, not from the radio, not from the cameras, from inside my own head, a whisper thin as frost. "Let me in." My whole body jerked. I clapped a hand over my ear instinctively, as if blocking sound would block thought. The whisper came again, threaded through my skull like a needle. "You put me away. You closed the door." My eyes stung with tears, not from emotion, but from panic, from the cold, from the feeling of being invaded. "I didn't," I whispered, voice trembling. "You were dead." The one outside tilted her head, as if considering that. Then she tapped the glass again. "Knock, knock," and smiled wider. On the monitor, the hallway, her lifted her hand. She began sliding her fingers along the seam of the door, tracing it, as if searching for a crack. The whisper pressed again. "Not dead, not yet." I stumbled backward until my hips hit the desk. My hands scrambled across the surface, knocking papers free. My badge fell to the floor. The radio clattered. I grabbed my phone with numb fingers and tried to dial 911, but my hands shook too much. The screen blurred. I hit wrong numbers. Behind me, the one outside leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging it again. This time, she drew something else. A line down the center of the circle. Like a zipper, like a body bag. The hallway door rattled suddenly. Not a gentle knock, a sharp jolt, as if someone had thrown their weight against it. The bolt held. Another jolt, then another. The metal frame groaned. The whisper in my head turned sharper. "Open." The lights flickered harder now, strobing. The monitors flashed. The air smelled faintly metallic, like pennies and cold water. I forced myself into motion. I snatched my badge from the floor, bolted to the emergency override panel near the exit doors. If I could get outside, I could reach security. I could reach the hospital. I could reach people. I slammed the badge against the reader. Red light. Denied. I stared, disbelieving. What? No. I tried again. Red. My badge should work. It always worked. I looked at the panel. The screen on it glitched. Letters swam and distorted. Then slowly, the text changed. Access open. Not denied. Not granted. Open. Like an invitation. The one outside grinned. She lifted her hand and placed her fingertips on the metal seam between the doors. Then she pulled, not with effort, not with strain. She pulled, and the doors began to part like soft flesh. Metal groaned, bending. The seam widened. The cold outside rushed in, carrying wind and damp. The security lamps outside flickered. I screamed then, finally, and stumbled away from the doors, toward the locker room doorway, the only other exit from the desk area. The hallway door behind me rattled again, harder. The bolt began to bend. I ran into the locker room and slammed the door. The locker room was small, lined with lockers, a bench, a mirror. and a second door that led to the autopsy suite corridor. I fumbled with the latch and locked it. My chest heaved. I pressed my back to the door. Silence. For a moment, everything stopped. No rattling, no knocking, just my breath and the pounding in my ears. I looked around wildly for something, anything I could use as a weapon. A mop handle, a metal chair, a fire extinguisher. My eyes landed on the mirror. My reflection stared back, eyes wide, face pale, hair disheveled. And then in the mirror, behind me, someone stood. My heart dropped so violently, it felt like falling. I spun. No one. I looked back at the mirror. Behind my reflection, she was there again, standing just inches behind me, though the room behind me was empty. In the mirror only. Her eyes were open, her lips curved in a patient smile. She raised her hand and pressed it against the mirror surface from her side. On my side, the glass rippled slightly, like water. Cold rolled off it. My knees went weak. In the mirror, her mouth opened, and she whispered with exaggerated clarity, as if teaching me the words. Whispers in the dark. My blood iced, because those weren't random words. That was my channel name, the one I'd only ever said out loud in private, alone, when I fantasized about starting it. The one I'd never written on any morgue paperwork. The one no one at work knew. The mirror her smiled, as if she'd plucked it right from my brain. Then she pressed harder. The mirror bowed outward. A thin crack appeared near the edge, spidering like frost spreading. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bench. No, I whispered, voice breaking. No, no, no. The locker room door behind me rattled suddenly, as if something outside had struck it. A heavy thud. The bolt on that door ground too. I was trapped between doors and a mirror that was becoming something else. My phone shook in my hand. I finally managed to unlock it and dial 911. My thumb slipped, hit speaker. It rang. Once, twice, then the call connected. But instead of an operator, I heard breathing. Slow, wet, familiar. My stomach lurched. I stared at the phone screen. No number, just blank. And the breathing grew louder. Then a whisper, thin as frost. You called me. I threw the phone across the room. It hit a locker with a metallic clang and fell. The mirror cracked again, louder. Another spiderweb line. The glass rippled. In the mirror, she began to push her fingers through. They emerged on my side, breaking the surface like someone pushing through ice. Her fingers were pale, and at their tips were nails, but not nails. They looked like thin shards of something dark, like obsidian. The locker room door behind me slammed again. The latch began to split. My brain screamed, move. I bolted for the autopsy corridor door and yanked it open. Cold air and the smell of disinfectant hit me. I ran into the corridor, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the key. The corridor led to the autopsy suite, a larger room with drains in the floor, overhead surgical lights, stainless steel tables, cabinets of instruments. It was the most clinical place in the building. And right then, it felt like the worst place to be, because there was nowhere warm, nowhere soft, nowhere human. Just metal and drains and sharp things. I ran into the autopsy suite anyway, because I knew it better than anywhere else. I knew where the exits were. I knew where the emergency phone was mounted on the wall. I grabbed it and hit the button for security. No dial tone, only that same breathing. I slammed it down. The overhead lights flickered. The room darkened, brightened, darkened again, like it was struggling to remember how to be lit. From the corridor behind me came a slow, scraping sound, like something dragging itself along the floor. Then a soft thump, then another. Something was coming toward the autopsy suite door. I backed away, eyes darting. My gaze landed on the instrument cabinet. Scalpels, bone saw, rib shears, forceps, scissors, tools for cutting. My hands trembled as I yanked open the cabinet and grabbed the first thing my fingers found, a heavy pair of rib shears. They felt ridiculous in my hands, too medical, too specific, but the metal weight steadied me slightly. The scraping outside grew closer. The autopsy suite door handle twitched. I raised the shears, as if that would help. The handle turned slowly, but the door didn't open because it was locked. For a moment, I dared to hope it would hold. Then something slid under the gap at the bottom of the door. At first it looked like smoke, then like hair, but it moved too purposefully, too thickly. A strand of dark, damp hair crept under the door, curling on the floor like a worm. Then another. Then another. They thickened into a rope of hair, writhing, spreading. My breath hitched. I stepped back, but the hair moved faster, snaking toward me. I swung the rib shears down instinctively, chopping. The blades closed on the hair. They cut through it easily, too easily. It felt like cutting wet string, but the severed ends didn't fall limp. They twitched, they writhed as if angry, and the cut ends began to grow. Tiny filaments sprouted, branching, crawling across the floor. Like roots, I stumbled backward until my back hit the stainless autopsy table. The hair roots reached the legs of the table and began climbing. I backed away along the table edge, heart racing, eyes wide. The overhead surgical light above the table flickered and snapped on suddenly, glaring white. In that harsh spotlight, I saw the hair clearly, hundreds of strands, moving as if alive, slick with moisture. They reached up toward me, like hands wanting to touch. The autopsy suite door shuddered. A heavy thud hit it from the other side, making the metal bow inward slightly. The hair surged. I swung the shears again, cutting, but it was pointless. Every cut made more ends. Every end made more crawling filaments. The whisper returned, not just in my head now, but in the air, in the room, in the vents. It came from everywhere. You put me in a drawer. The autopsy table vibrated under my hands. You zipped me shut. The surgical light above flickered, and in the reflection of the stainless table surface, I saw something. A shape beneath the table. A face, her face, looking up at me from the reflection, though there was nothing physically beneath the table. Her eyes were open. Her mouth formed that smile. Then the reflection mouth opened wider, and from the reflection, a sound came, soft, wet, delighted. A laugh. I screamed and stumbled away from the table, nearly slipping on the writhing hair. The air grew colder, and the smell shifted, less disinfectant, more damp earth, more river water, more old metal. The morgue was changing around me. Or maybe it was just me finally seeing what had always been there. The door buckled inward. The lock snapped. The autopsy suite door swung open violently, and she stood there, naked, pale, damp, with bruising blooming around her throat like ink in water. Her hair hung in long ropes, dripping. Her eyes were wide and unblinking. Her smile was too big. She stepped into the room. Behind her, in the corridor, the lights flickered, and for a second, I saw more shapes, shadows that looked like bodies standing upright, faces blurred, eyes glinting. Then the light steadied, and it was just her. She lifted her hand and pointed at me. Her finger shook slightly, as if she was excited. Then she spoke aloud, voice scraping like a zipper being pulled open. Ilana, my name. I froze, blood roaring in my ears. How I choked. Her smile widened, and her eyes glittered like ice. You watched, she said slowly, words coming with effort, like she was learning speech from memory. You wrote. She took another step. The writhing hair on the floor surged toward her like eager pets. She looked down at it, pleased, then back at me. You know doors, she whispered. I backed away, hands gripping the rib shears so hard my fingers cramped. What are you? I whispered. She tilted her head, considering, as if the question amused her. Then she lifted her hand to her throat and pressed her fingers into the bruised ring. She dug, not scratching, not tearing skin. She pushed her fingers into the flesh as if it were soft clay. My stomach turned. I gagged, but couldn't look away. Her fingers sank deeper. Her throat bulged grotesquely. Then she pulled her hand away, and in her palm was something dark and wet, a strip of material like a ribbon. She held it up. It looked like a thin band of black plastic, a piece of the body bag. She opened her mouth and placed it on her tongue like candy. Then she smiled with it between her teeth, as if it tasted good. I felt my mind fracture, sanity sliding. She took another step. The hair roots on the floor surged toward me again. I raised the shears. Stay back, I screamed, voice cracking. She stopped. Her smile faded slightly. Her eyes narrowed. Then she whispered, very softly, with something like hurt. You closed me. And the lights went out. not flickered, not dimmed. Out, the room plunged into darkness, so complete it felt thick. My scream died in my throat. In the darkness, I heard her moving. Not footsteps, a sliding sound, like wet skin on metal. I swung the shears blindly, but they cut only air. Then something cold touched my wrist. Fingers, they wrapped around me with impossible strength. I tried to yank away, but her grip tightened. Her fingers were so cold, they burned through my glove. She pulled me forward. I stumbled, nearly falling, and in the darkness, inches from my face, I felt breath icy and damp on my cheek. Her voice came right beside my ear, intimate as a lover. Open. My mind flashed images, drawers, zippers, doors, locks. Open. Open what? Then I felt her hand move, sliding upward, pressing against my throat. Her fingers fit into the bruised ring she had around hers, like she was teaching my skin what to become. I gagged, hands clawing at her wrist. The rib shears clattered to the floor. My vision flashed white at the edges. In that panic haze, my hand brushed the autopsy table edge and found something. The bone saw handle. I didn't think. I grabbed it and yanked. The saw roared to life, loud and vicious. A screaming mechanical sound that shredded the silence. The sudden noise startled her grip. It loosened just enough. I swung the saw blindly in front of me. I felt it hit something, not bone, not flesh. Something thick and wet, like cutting through soaked leather. A sound came from her, not a scream but a hiss, sharp and furious. Her grip released. I stumbled backward, gasping, saw buzzing in my hands. The lights flickered back on in jerky stutters. In the strobing light, I saw her. She stood a few feet away, head tilted, hair hanging. One side of her torso had a long, ragged cut where the saw had grazed, but there was no blood. Inside the cut, I saw blackness, not organs, not muscle, a hollow dark, like the inside of a body bag. Her smile returned, slower now, filled with something like admiration. She lifted her hand and touched the cut. Her fingers sank in slightly, as if her body wasn't solid. Then she looked at me again. "You cut," she whispered. She stepped forward. The cut in her side widened, and from it spilled strands of black plastic, thin, writhing, like tendrils. They reached toward me. I screamed and ran. I ran past her, out into the corridor. The bone saw still buzzing in my hand like a desperate talisman. I didn't care about noise. I didn't care about rules. I only cared about distance. Behind me, I heard her move, not chase exactly. More like follow, slowly, confidently. Like a cat that knows the mouse has nowhere to go. I sprinted down the corridor toward the loading bay, because it had a manual exit that could be forced open in emergencies. It was heavy, but it wasn't purely electronic. My lungs burned. My eyes streamed tears from cold and panic. The corridor lights flickered as I passed, shadows leaping. The building felt alive, like it was breathing around me. I reached the loading bay door and slammed my shoulder into it, fumbling for the crash bar. It didn't budge. I hit it again. Nothing. I looked up. There was a chain looped through the handles, secured with a padlock that hadn't been there before. My mind went blank with disbelief. The building was locking itself. Or she was. Footsteps, or that sliding sound, approached behind me. I turned, saw buzzing in my hand, ready to swing. She stood at the far end of the corridor, framed by flickering light. Her hair moved as if underwater. Her smile was calm. She lifted her hand and pointed at the bone saw. Then she pointed at me. Then she made a slow, deliberate pulling motion with her fingers. The bone saw in my hand jerked, not from my grip slipping, from something else yanking it. It ripped out of my hands like it was weightless. It flew down the corridor toward her, buzzing wildly. She caught it easily, fingers wrapping around the handle without flinching, without reacting to the blade. Then she turned it off with a casual flick, like someone shutting a book. Silence rushed in. My heart dropped. She took one step forward. "You can't," she whispered. "Keep me shut." I backed against the locked loading bay door, trapped. My hands fumbled behind me, searching for anything, an emergency lever, a tool, a miracle. My fingers brushed something cold and metal on a shelf nearby. A flare gun. We had one for rare situations, power failures during transport, emergency signaling. I'd never used it. I grabbed it with trembling hands. She saw it and smiled wider, as if she loved watching me try. I aimed with shaking arms. My fingers clenched the trigger. The flare fired with a deafening pop, streaking down the corridor in a line of bright, angry light. It hit her chest. For a second, the corridor was filled with blinding red-orange glow. The flare stuck in her like a burning arrow. I expected flesh to burn. Instead, the light seemed to sink into her. Her chest glowed from within like a lantern. Her smile widened into something ecstatic. She tilted her head back and inhaled, and the burning flare dimmed as if she was drinking the light. The corridor lights flickered and went out again. One by one, swallowed. Darkness crawled toward me. She stepped forward, chest still faintly glowing. Her voice was a soft rasp. Warm. I felt my sanity tearing. I sobbed without meaning to. "Please," I whispered. "Please just leave me alone." She stopped, considering. Then she tilted her head, and her expression shifted, not to sympathy, but to something like curiosity. "You whisper," she said. I blinked, tears freezing on my lashes. "What?" She took another step. "You tell stories." My blood iced again. She knew too much. She had taken pieces of me. My thoughts, my fantasies, my private words. She leaned closer. Her eyes were huge, reflecting faint light. "You open mouths," she whispered. "In dark, people listen." Her lips moved slowly, as if savoring every word. "You open doors." Then she lifted her hand and touched my cheek. Her fingers were icy, but there was something else, something pulling, like she wasn't just touching skin, but reaching beneath it. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. She leaned in until her mouth was near my ear, and she whispered softly, intimately, like a secret meant only for me. "Let me in." The darkness behind her thickened, and for a second, I saw shapes moving in it, more hair, more shadows, more bodies standing where they shouldn't. I realized then, with horrifying clarity, she wasn't a single thing. She was a door, and she wanted me to open. I don't know how I found the strength. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the last stubborn spark of being alive. I jerked my head away from her hand and slammed my palm into the emergency alarm panel on the wall beside the loading bay. A shrill siren erupted, loud enough to rattle teeth. Red lights flashed, bathing everything in pools of crimson. For the first time, her expression flickered annoyance, discomfort. The siren was more than noise. It was vibration. It was frequency. It filled the air. Her hair writhed violently, as if the sound hurt. She stepped back. The shadows behind her recoiled too, trembling like smoke in wind. I pressed the alarm again and again, as if more would help. The siren screamed. Her mouth opened, and this time she did scream, not a human scream, but a ripping sound, like plastic tearing under strain. The corridor lights flashed wildly. She staggered, clutching her head. I took the chance. I threw myself at the loading bay shelf, grabbing anything tools, boxes, hurling them at the chain lock with frantic strength. A wrench, a metal rod, a heavy clamp. I slammed the wrench against the padlock again and again. My arms burned. My hands slipped. Behind me, her tearing scream shifted into angry hissing. The shadows surged forward, despite the siren. Hair roots crawled faster. The padlock finally gave with a sharp snap. I ripped the chain away and shoved the door crash bar. The loading bay door burst open with a rush of freezing night air. I stumbled outside into the dark lot, siren still wailing behind me, red light spilling out like blood. The wind slapped my face. The security lamps buzzed overhead. The night smelled like wet asphalt and cold exhaust. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the hospital walkway, breath tearing from my lungs. When I finally turned, I saw the loading bay door standing open, red light pulsing, and in the doorway, she stood, framed in crimson. She didn't step out. She just watched me. Her chest still faintly glowed where the flare had been, like an ember. Her eyes were open, and she smiled. Then, very slowly, she lifted her hand and drew a line across her throat. Not a threat, a reminder. And she whispered, so softly, I felt it more than heard it, carried on the wind like frost. Soon, security found me sobbing on the walkway. Officers shouted, doors slammed, people ran. Radios crackled. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. They rushed into the morgue in a group, armed and loud, confident in numbers and flashlights. They found nothing. No naked woman, no hair roots, no broken doors. In cold storage, the drawer I'd opened was shut, locked. The bag inside was zipped closed. The tag was back on the zipper loop, clean and dry, as if it had never been torn. In the intake bay, the shelves were neat. No bags disturbed. In the autopsy suite, no hair on the floor. No scratches. No sign of struggle. The only thing that proved anything had happened was my own bruised throat, faint finger marks, ringed like the ones I'd seen on her. And the cameras, except the camera feeds were corrupted, glitched, hours of footage missing. The cold storage feed showed static from 2:20 onward. The intake bay feed froze on an empty frame. The hallway camera. It showed me walking down the corridor alone. Nothing behind me. Nothing. They told me it was stress. That I'd imagined it. That working nights around death can do strange things to a mind. That maybe I'd had a panic attack and injured myself. I quit 2 days later. I tried to forget. I moved apartments. I changed my routine. I slept with lights on. I stopped passing mirrors without looking away. I tried to convince myself it had been some perfect storm of fear and isolation. And for a while, it almost worked. Until last week, I was cleaning out an old box of work things, scrubs I didn't wear anymore, ID lanyards, paperwork I'd never bothered shredding. I found my morgue badge at the bottom. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I held it in my hand, turning it over, feeling the raised numbers. The plastic felt colder than it should have. And then my phone buzzed. A notification. A new subscriber. I don't even have a channel yet. Not officially. Just a placeholder account I made months ago, named after the thing she said. Whispers in the dark. My skin prickled. I opened the notification with trembling fingers. There was a message attached. No username, just a blank profile picture. The message contained only 3 words. Let me in. And beneath it, a video file. I didn't want to open it. I did anyway. The video was grainy black and white. Security footage. Cold storage. The camera angle showed the drawer. And then, slowly, the drawer slid open from the inside. A hand emerged. Not pale, not human. A hand made of black plastic and wet hair and darkness. It grabbed the edge, pulled itself free, and as the figure rose, eyes open, smiling, it leaned toward the camera, toward me, and it whispered perfectly in my own voice. Good evening, my fellow whisperers, and welcome back to Whispers in the Dark. So if you're listening right now, and you felt the temperature drop a little, or you thought you saw something move in the corner of your room, don't dismiss it too quickly. And if you have a mirror nearby, maybe don't look too hard, because doors don't always look like doors. Sometimes they look like screens. Sometimes they look like drawers. Sometimes they look like mouths. And sometimes they look like stories. Thank you for listening to tonight's tale on Whispers in the Dark. I would say, if I were brave enough to make this into a video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe, and maybe keep a light on for me. But I can't record it. Not yet, because every time I try to hit record, my camera app glitches. The screen turns black, and for a split second, reflected in that dark glass, I see her behind me, eyes open, smiling, waiting, and somewhere deep in the quiet of my apartment, in the space between my breaths, I hear the softest sound of all, a zipper opening. Until next time, good night, and don't let the dark whisper back.